I'm joined today by three guests, Michael Seidel from MetaLink, Chayan Asli from Vestoon, and Philip Howard from Bloor Research. Michael and Chayan are running startups, and Philip has over 30 years experience thinking about graphs and conducting graph analyses. So we are in great hands for this conversation. So let's start out with kind of the big picture perspective, right? Like knowledge graphs and industry. What are the opportunities that you are currently seeing from your perspective in the industries that you're familiar with, that you work in currently, with your product, whatever is kind of relevant to your view? Why don't we start with Michael?
So yeah, thank you for having me here. Yeah, I'm Michael, the CEO of MetaLink, and so the question was like a broader knowledge graph perspective on our industry. So in journalism, like I think the broadest topic at the moment is like concerning fake news, but fake news is just like one type of misinformation. There are actually like 7 types of misinformation, and every type of misinformation is like pretty important for the end consumer out there. And I think that the knowledge graph databases like Reckon come in really handy to allow like a pretty an undreamt of possibility of data interactivity and to explore data and yeah, get to know new insights on that. So that's pretty interesting and yeah, journalism.
Right, we can connect whole new fields of context that we just simply can't at the moment. Cheyenne, what about you? What do you see and what background, what industry are you working in with your startup?
Yes. So yeah, I'm the founder of Veston, which is a quantitative investment firm. And so typically in our case, what we see is the importance of context. So if we look at the traditional way of using quant or mathematics to investing, it's a lot of often based on historical pattern. And then so if we look at the implementation or the use of machine learning in our space, it's very different than other spaces. So when you use machine learning, for example, on time series, you will notice that it's extremely noisy and it's extremely hard to make sense out of data. And this is where the importance of context, I think, be able to connect different information from the open space becomes important. And knowledge graph, I think it's very valuable when it comes to revealing those contexts, interpretation from a small sets of data, rather than just relying on a big neural network where you have very little understanding of what's going on. And I think this is a very important component when it comes to, yeah, in such situation.
Have you seen that? Is that how you're leveraging knowledge graphs? I imagine to do that. Have you seen that that's making sort of a sea change in what you can achieve?
In our case, yes, absolutely. So I don't think there is a lot of other quant fund or startup using knowledge graphs. But in our case, the way we position ourselves is really about relying on a small set of information, understanding it, and being able to include that out of a bigger part of a bigger system. And so, if you look at it in that context, interpretation becomes very important. And so for us, that has a tremendous value, right?
Interesting. And Michael, maybe we can double back and you can give us the counterpart for, so if Cheyenne is focused on a small set of information, being able to see that in the bigger picture, like what is it that you are using knowledge graphs for? But before we do that, I'm really curious to hear Philip's perspective on the industry at large. You've been studying graphs since your BA thesis. So what have you seen? What's happening now, and how does that compare to the historical perspective?
Well, I think it's interesting that Cheyenne and Michael have both very different use cases. Mm-hmm. And the most, in a way, interesting thing about knowledge graphs is the fact that there are so many different use cases, and some of them are actually fairly trivial, but some of them are very complex. I think Cheyenne's is, that's doing some really clever stuff with knowledge graphs. But on the other hand, you've got people like, Dun & Bradstreet providing information to their clients about, which companies own which subsidiaries and stuff like that. And then you've got healthcare, and you've got pharmaceuticals, and you've got the military, and you've got, there are loads of different people doing a whole range of different things. And that, in a way, is, from my point of view as an industry analyst, looking at, which graph databases you might use. It makes it interesting because it's not all, a single funnel.
Mm-hmm. There's a lot of dynamicity, and I think that's the power of graphs. And there's also, that can be the challenge too, because a lot of folks don't know maybe where to start, right? Like, how do you choose the right graph database for your use case? How do you even begin to jump into this? So maybe we can wrap up a little bit later with some tips to start out for anyone who, is excited to explore the technology. But in the meantime, I'm really curious about your startups, Michael and Cheyenne. So Michael, especially, can you tell us more about the opportunity that you're pursuing and how knowledge graphs are making that possible?
Mm-hmm. Sure. So we at MetaLink, by the way, I'm the CEO. We help journalists who are like experiencing serious time pressure in their day-to-day work. And we thought about, okay, how can we help them like boosting their research and at the same time, like we assure that like the quality stays the same or strives like up high. So we are developing a research network and that supports them in researching complex topics quickly and securely together with experts. So we're not just relying on technology alone, but on a like collaboration. And the problem is like, okay, experts are being searched in quite different ways. And like the most usual way is like just to ask your colleagues. So do you know someone who has a clue on topic X or Y, Z? But that's a huge problem. So we approach that problem differently and try to get a clue about the competence of an expert. And so what we are using knowledge graphs for is like we're trying to map competence basically in a taxonomy inside of an ontology to always like really pinpoint the search query into a field of topics and then connect this to the fitting experts in these fields. Yeah, and that really helps us.
So, I mean, that's a completely different approach, right, to finding these connections. And so it's interesting because in both of like in both cases, there's a completely different way that we can approach the problems that we already have to solve, but knowledge graphs give us a unique vantage point to do that. And so, what is the experience in the field like for you to go from something that's not connected, right? Like what is, knowledge graphs give you the opportunity to connect things, but how do you do that? Is it a challenge along the way or does everything sort of just pop in? And yeah, can you speak to that, Michael, and next Cheyenne?
Yes, so I remember back to when I talked to my professor at the university. So which database technology should I use? I want to achieve that. And he came up with like the traditional SQL or NoSQL databases. And I wasn't really sure if that's the right path. So I began my research and one day stumbled upon Gartner on GitHub. And the first like amazing thing that happened is that I was able to do first tests in like 3 hours. So Gartner is really easy to get into, but you can achieve really complex and insights out of this. And this is like absolutely amazing work that these guys have done. And I don't know. So in the industry, journalists have, I mean, they are like information guys. So they kind of have a clue about how information is being transferred in the world, but they're not really like the technical guys. So they have a clue about how it works, but not which like tools are out there to achieve this because they are not programmers at all. So if you like tell them about these kind of stuff, they are like really, really interested and at the same time hyped to boost their own research. So yeah, I hope I answered your question with that. And I give the ball.
That's great. Chayan. Yes, thank you. And it's so I think it's really interesting because you're really working with the user side, right? Like the front end, you need to use this because it's going to completely elevate the approach that you have currently. But Cheyenne, you're kind of working more on the back end, right? Like you use knowledge graphs in order to produce your whole quantitative approach So you don't need to convince anyone, but you do really need to get actual results. So how does that work? What does that look like for you?
Yes, I think a big challenge that we kind of able to solve using knowledge graph is what we call the non-stationary problem, where in the traditional way, when you use machine learning, you often assess that you're in a you're in a closed environment. Whereas in the quantitative investments phase, you're actually not in a closed environment. The market changes all the time. You have so many uncertainty and external component that could comes in, and this is where I think adding also, to joining Michael, this human experts input become extremely important, because as opposed to machines, humans have this unique ability to kind of extrapolate whatever they've learned from the experience to a complete foreign situation, and this could help to bring on those externalities. And so this and so this is where this human machine, I think, collaboration becomes important, that we try to run in, and I think knowledge graphs in that case helps. For example, you can think of a domain expert who might doesn't have much understanding of coding, but then you can encode that view, or basically the data scientist can encode that view and then extend that, then using machine learning. And those are very tremendous, I think, valuable component that you can have in a system where you want to kind of have some important economic hypothesis that you want to now validate using data science.
Yes, absolutely. So really expanding the vision, the size of the view that can be considered, and then connecting those pieces as well. That's the value, right, of graphs. So taking a step back and kind of getting excited and visionary here for a moment, what do you see graphs as being able to do potentially in the future, stepping out of maybe just our industry focus now, but
Right.
across the board? What is the promise of graphs?
Well, something I'm very passionate about is that form of multidisciplinary distributed knowledge, where you can kind of centralize the learning of a decentralized network of knowledge providers. So, for example, you might have a data scientist, or somebody else might be a data provider, and each of them have different value they can bring. They also have their own individual IP, and how you can maybe have a system where you can kind of learn from the output that you're getting from this different source of knowledge, and accumulate that into a centralized platform where you kind of protecting that privacy premise in that case, but also kind of learning from sources of different of unique knowledge. Yeah.
Yes, exactly.
This is something that I see kind of in the future, I think, taking place, and of course that kind of improvement of this the expert knowledge to interact with the knowledge graph. I think that the visual components and the fact that you can encode someone's knowledge without him necessarily knowing really how to code and interact with that data science world, I think that's extremely valuable.
Yeah, absolutely. Controlled coordination, right? Moving bigger and bigger things together.
Right.
But we're about to be near the end of our very short time together. But Michael, Phil, do you have anything else that you'd like to add to that perspective?
I'd like to just add that, in a way, a knowledge graph, we call it a knowledge graph, but it's a misnomer, because we're not always capturing knowledge. Sometimes we're capturing possible knowledge. The ability to put a probability on a connection, for example. You think there's a connection, but you don't actually know. So I think that's something important and will become more important in the future.
Yes, potentiality, right? Complexity, all of those things that we can now begin to think about at the same time because they can be represented. Michael, what about you?
Yeah, I'm really curious about like the future of collaboration between different stakeholders in the world of information, and if you are able to explore like competencies kind of overlapping or being connected together when they make sense in decision-making processes, like thought of democracy or solutions that have to be built really fast to conquer like global urgencies, for example. That is like something really, really interesting in my opinion.
Yes, like climate change, right? That's my area of focus. So on that note, graphs are going to save the world and also make everyone very coordinated, democratize all of these fantastic things. Thank you, Michael, Cheyenne, Philip. This was a fantastic little 15-minute chat.